Yo, hope you didn't miss me much. I mean, look, this Walpurgis had nothing to do, and the ideas that I had during the time were pretty mid at best. But I might still make those videos if I feel like it, but never mind that. As of right now, our abbreviation Love and Sadist here, Ryoshu, is the biggest focus here right now, especially since Canto 9 is coming after the 9th anniversary and the Refraction Railway 1 rerun, which is going to be great, I imagine. Now, as of writing this, there is no teaser for Canto 9 or even her seasonal ego at that, so some might say that I'm being a bit early with this video since these two may or may not provide some answers to the speculations they'll provide in this video, but to be quite honest, these teasers only provides more questions than answers, so the earlier the better, I say. Now, as you can tell, this video is quite a long one, I imagine, just as long if not longer than the Bad End IDs video, which also means that I have quite a lot to talk about as well. Things such as what we know about Ryoshu, her IDs, egos, her literary source, and also some of my predictions to Canto 9. Now yes, I did say in the Q&A video that I would not talk about Canto 9 or make theories about it, but things change over time is my excuse here. And plus, might as well provide some of my own thoughts towards a Canto that focuses on potentially my most favorite sinner in the whole goddamn game. Next to Faust, of course. One more thing that I want to say before we start this video. This video contains spoilers for practically everything in Limbus, which possibly includes Canto 9 as well. I'm not going to take any chances here, just in case what I'm going to say here is correct and will be a part of Canto 9. Alright? You get it? Cool. Let's GSWTV. As far as any character analysis goes, we have to start with the facts. And in regards to what we know about Ryoshu, we practically know nothing about her. Okay, that's a bit of a stretch, but truthfully, we don't know much about who Ryoshu was before joining the LCB as a sinner. Some of the other sinners we can either guess who they were, or they themselves have told us about their pasts. Ryoshu, on the other hand, is very tight-lipped about that, and doesn't tell us anything at all, which shouldn't come too much of a surprise from the sinner with the least amount of dialogue in the entire game's story. But I don't want to complain too much. So if we actually want to start talking about what we do know about her, then a good place to start would probably be with the basics. And for that, we have to go all the way back in the prologue, where we were given introductions to all of our sinners, including Ryoshu, as it gives us a small snippet of who she is.
Ryoshu.
As they say, every person has their own creed, and it's only right to respect it as the executive manager. But with some creeds, you will have difficulty in even simply pretending to sympathize. You will have noticed that the sinner in question is a silent chain smoker whose eyes shine with a euphoric gleam only during battle. She believes that senselessly destroying the enemy's heads is an uncultured act, and a step backwards for art. Caution, this sinner's background is one that even our company may have trouble handling. It has advised against making her breed personal resentment towards you. Fun fact, by the way, there's an inconsistency with this intro that's in the game and the one that is in the official website, where the crossout sentence here is missing. But don't worry too much about it. As far as we have seen, there is no mention of a red button that Dante can press whenever he's at his wit's end and is in relation to Ryoshu. So no, that self-destruction button that was told to us by Faust in Canto 5 is not it. Maybe. But other than that small inconsistency, from that intro alone, we can tell that Ryoshu's quite violent, so to say. And we get to see this pretty early on in Canto 1, where the first thing that she does is fucking kill Heathcliff and Ishmael because, in her words, they were being a bunch of noisy crying hogs that needed scragging. This interaction alone, and a few more after this one, comes to show that she has no proper respect or courtesy to anyone around her, including her fellow sinners of course. But beyond that violent nature and hostile personality, she's surprisingly one of the more quieter sinners, which, wow, what a surprise that the sinner with the least amount of dialogue is quiet. How shocking. Her reasoning for being silent in general is just because she doesn't like butting into conversations, and she also doesn't like talking in general, since from her perspective, talking normally takes too long to get the point of the conversation across. That's why she likes to abbreviate a lot whenever she does talk, using a thing that she likes to call sangria, otherwise known as succulent abbreviation naturally germinates rather immaculate art. She considers sangria and abbreviation in general, whether it comes in the form of sentences or people, as a form of beauty, since it's quick, you can get your point across more efficiently, and you don't waste too much time as you would talking without it. However, despite that sort of belief, only one person actually understands what she's saying, that being our little German boy, Sinclair, aka her translator. The relationship between the two of them is very odd, to say the least. In fact, Sinclair is really the only sinner that she's more or less content to talk with, but she's also quite patient with him. And sure, there are moments where she feels agitated by his existence whenever he mistranslates her, especially as of more recently as he plants some of his personal feelings into the translations. It's not like she actually wants to kill him. In fact, despite her being more or less a silent and sadistic killer to everyone around her, she's actually one of the more passive sinners in this bus if you really think about it. Like, beyond the incident with Canto 1, when was the last time she has actually killed someone in the bus? Yeah, you see, every little violent thing that she does say remains as just that, what was said. In fact, she has also shown that she has a more softer and calmer personality, as seen in both TKT and Spring Cultivation, which might come as a shock to some. After all, this kind of personality is not something that you expect from a sadistic person who considers any form of purposeful and creative violence as art. But it makes some sense if you want to delve into what little we know about her past. Though taking a break from her personality and character, when it comes to her background and lore, as said before, we don't really know much of who she was, and what she did before joining the LCB as a sinner, which is SAD, since if we had a second Intervallo, then I would at least have liked to talk more about her past with some guarantee. But unless Canto 9 gets delayed and a second Intervallo gets revealed, that's not going to happen. But getting back to what we know about Ryoshu's past, we practically know 3 things about her with some certainty. Those being, 1, she's connected with every one of the 5 fingers in one way or another. 2, her real actual name is Yoshihide, not Ryoshu, as revealed by Lei-Hen. And 3, she has a child, also revealed by Lei-Hen. Which, man, I cannot imagine not being surprised about the fact that Ryoshu, of all people, has a child, if you don't know anything about her beyond the game itself, that is. Well, it's not like it was impossible to guess either, since the few times that she does speak out about something either has something to do with art or, as of more recently, since TKT, family. But I still have a character to focus on, so we can talk more about the child thing later in the video. But for now, we can focus on the next best thing that comes with knowing her lore, that being her connections with the 5 fingers of the backstreets, aka the thumb, the index, the middle, the ring, and the pinky. Now, this connection was very obvious ever since she was first teased with this artwork, which, can I just say, this artwork is probably my most favorite out of all the other base sinners artworks. The contrast between black and red and the big hand thing giving it a sense of tightness as it looks like it's trying to grasp at Ryoshu. My god, it's fucking sick looking. But that artwork also shows a connection with the 5 fingers that we know, with each finger representing a different finger with their odd looking yet familiar designs. The thumb's hat and red shading, the index's prescript and seal, the middle's famous purple coloring covered to the brim with golden chains and a skull, the ring's abstract and square-like art thing, and the pinky's flesh and teeth while also having a bandage. Don't know how that relates to the pinky still, but unlike back then where we knew nothing about them, we can now guess what it's meant to represent, that being humanity or something along the lines, but that's only just from what Jatsu says, so I don't know. We'll eventually get to know more about the pinky soon though, I imagine. But going back to Ryoshu's relationship with the 5 fingers, going beyond the artwork, in the story itself, her relationship with the fingers is quite antagonistic, to say the least. In Canto 5, she calls Ricardo a BB, otherwise known as a bitch brother. In Canto 6, she criticizes the ring's art, saying that they aren't quite to her tastes, and doesn't really give a damn about what they do, despite both of them being bloodthirsty artists and could probably learn a thing or two from each other, I guess. And in Canto 8, she wants to absolutely fucking murder Lei-Hen for other reasons beyond him just being a capo of the thumb and the Chantery star of the pinky. Now, we don't know what is her relationship with the index themselves at all, since they never appeared in Limbus and will make their first ever appearance in Canto 9, but it's probably just as negative as it is with the other fingers, TBH. But beyond that hatred, she also knows quite a bit about the fingers, almost too much, some would say, knowing about the ring's gallery and quarter tech, and the fact that Lei-Hen was also a pinky way before the reveal in part 3. In fact, regarding her relationship with Lei-Hen, the fact that she can get away with calling Lei-Hen a shithead and insulting the fuck out of him in his presence is particularly interesting, since it shows that Ryoshu is on a similar rank to that of Lei-Hen, by thumb standards at least. In fact, she comments on some random soldatos not having enough tons to lose for this disrespect, which is certainly interesting. Who was Ryoshu to be considered on the same rank as a capo that is just under the underboss of the thumb? Well, in order to figure out about that, we have to quickly discuss her child. Now, Ryoshu is a very good parent, as seen with spring cultivation when she takes care of a child with ease, not that way, like a parent, so it shouldn't come too much of a surprise that she too has a child. But if that's the case, then why is Ryoshu here and not taking care of her child? Well, according to Lei Hen, who is the only source of information that we had in regards to Ryoshu's lore before being killed by Jashu here, her child is 1. In a location called the Spider's House, or I guess it's now called the House of Spiders with the recent localization changes, and 2. Something happened in the house that causes her to leave and join the LCB with a promise made with Faust. Now beyond that, we practically know nothing else about that. We don't know what the House of Spiders is, we don't know what exactly happened to the child, nothing. At most we can take guesses on what happened based off of what we know beyond the game itself, aka her literary source. But me personally, I think this is a bit too early for me to discuss her literary source just yet, especially because we do have 2 more things to cover that is in the game and is in relation to Ryoshu. Those being her IDs and egos, of course, since those are important as well if we're going to analyze a sinner in depth, I imagine, right? IDs and egos are quite important to talk about if you want to analyze a sinner's character more in depth. It reveals more about their inner thoughts and emotions that aren't necessarily obvious at first glance, and in the case of IDs specifically, can reveal some pretty major things in regards to a lot of things that pertain to the world of Project Moon, even if they technically take place in a different world with some differences here and there. But just as Carmen said, with the mere act of witnessing and only witnessing, the world reflected on the mirror will only grow clearer. So yeah, but when it comes to Ryoshu, she doesn't have a lot to expand on beyond what we have said for the past few minutes, and that's especially obvious when we talk about her egos. So I want to start off with the IDs first, since at the very least we can talk more about her through said IDs. Now, among her 11 IDs that she has, one of the more common similarities that a good majority of them have is the fact that they are all artistic in one way or another. 7. Ryoshu wants to create art because she believes in pacts, aka peak art created through swordsmanship, or in Carmen's words, it's far more likely that the child just needed an excuse to swing her sword. Lee Ryoshu's art comes from martial arts in the form of literal strength and flames, calling any sort of augmentation as a crutch, whilst also mocking Radian, Ishmael, and practically every other Leo ID that go on their gastro adventures, while she hones herself and is becoming stronger, which is quite ironic for a 00 ID to talk about her superiors. But she's a battle maniac, so it's not too surprising that she has that attitude. And speaking of, Kurokuma Ryoshu is happy to be a part of a strife against the Blade lineage and does nothing but sharpen, clean, polish her sword every single day, with Radian being her only companion to clash swords with. And Chef Ryoshu is, well, a chef artist thing where she makes beautiful human-made pies. So that's something. Now, as you can tell, a good majority of Ryoshu IDs has something to do with her art. Hell, I even talked in depth about W-Core Ryoshu in my W-Core video, and even she focused a lot on art. A lot more than her other IDs, which is nice to see. However, there are a couple IDs that go beyond just art. Those being Butler Ryoshu, Mao Ryoshu, Encore Ryoshu, and probably the most important ID of hers, Red Eyes and Penance Ryoshu. These 4 IDs are very interesting, to say the least, and require some explanation, since as you read their ID stories and also check their voice lines, because that's also important, you also get some interesting bits and pieces about these IDs and what they try to tell you about Ryoshu that isn't necessarily obvious from reading the story alone. Maid Ryoshu focuses on her tender side as she interacts with people that she knows and, well, I wouldn't necessarily say love, but I guess that fits, sure. This Ryoshu is the head butler who tries to take care of every single person in the Wuthering Heights manor, from her lower staff to even her pathetic master, Gregor. Not in the usual sense, however, in a more dickish and honest way, I guess. But along with that tender personality, she is also a Ryoshu that has 2 distinct differences from our Ryoshu, which is that 1, she doesn't smoke, at all in fact, which is quite the opposite to what we know about her being a chain smoker, and 2, she doesn't back down from a hard fight, as seen when she fought with Wild Hunt Heathcliff in her ID story, alone, in fact, who is a lot more powerful than her in some regard. This is a very important detail, because our Ryoshu has a sort of defeatist attitude, since whenever she fights someone that is clearly more powerful than her, like Ricardo, Sancho, or even Lei-Hen, she always kind of just gives up, saying that she will take her last sig as she prepares for potentially her final battle, which is very interesting. I'll expand more on this when I theorize on Canto 9, since I believe that defeatist personality is one of the biggest things that Canto 9 will cover in depth. Now, initially, at first glance, it seems like Mao Ryoshu is just like the other Ryoshus, who's violent and very artistic. Hell, she even writes out her imaginary battlefields and violent thoughts on a scroll, while the other Heisho summarizes a report because she's bored out of her mind. However, this Ryoshu also has a small thing that, although isn't very obvious, if you look around to certain moments within Limbus' story, it's a very interesting detail. And it's the fact that Ryoshu has a memory problem. If you may recall, back in the climax of Canto 4, she has quite an odd reaction to having her memories of what happened in there being forcefully removed. She also has a unique passive in Canto 8 when she fights Lei-Hen called Mutilated Memory, which is also interesting to say the least. And in the case of Ryoshu, she always has a sort of tendency to leave markings of the past behind for her future self to reminisce on. Even when writing on her scroll, she always tends to talk about the past a lot, reminding herself constantly about having memories of serving a previous lord once and testing her strength against a different Heisho. She even wants her name to be remembered, as, from her perspective, neither Mao nor Heisho can represent who I am. You will address me as Ryoshu, Lord, which makes her sorta unique, I guess, and quite the opposite to what the Heisho are meant to represent. That being faceless beasts who have no need for human thoughts, emotions, or memories, and should only follow orders of their lord. I wonder how all of that relates back to our Ryoshu. Now, Encore Ryoshu's ID story, on one hand, is just a massive exposition dump on what's going on with Encore and the new League of Nine, but on the other hand, it comes to show how arrogant and prideful Ryoshu can be, taken in the context of who exactly this ID is meant to represent, Jiahuan, and the abnormality her ear comes from. Essentially, the abnormality, the spiral of contempt, is very complicated. It's an abnormality that looks down on all beings with absolute hatred and scorn, looking down at you with contempt on even daring to look at it. But this contempt is, as Ryoshu says, is a shared brush, since you looking up at it also brings out your anger and contempt for being looked down upon, creating this spiral of hatred between everyone looking up and down amongst each other, holding contempt for the gaze of contempt itself, and the person actually holding said gaze. Or you are just being awestruck at what's above, fascinated by the divine golden being, I guess. Now, take what I said about the abnormality here and apply that to Encore Ryoshu, and boom, there you go. Encore Ryoshu wishes to be the spiral itself, if that makes any sense. She wants to be viewed and gazed in either awe or contempt, whilst looking down on you with the same kind of gaze of contempt, like looking down on a mere insect. Now, one other thing that I will say about this ID, beyond her ID story and her voice lines, her passive, Hand I Let Slip, mirrors that of Jiahuan's passive, called My Little Brother's Hand I Let Slip. Now, this passive has one particular thing that makes this ID also interesting, and it's the censoring. It's obvious that this passive is meant to say something along the lines of My child's hand I let slip, so why censor it? Hell, even the way it's censored is a bit different to how Project Moon usually censors things, with white boxes. Maybe it links back to the memory thing that I talked about with Ryoshu, or maybe I'm just reading into this too much. Oh well, we'll have to wait and see for Canto 9 to expand on that. But since we spoke on her child, Red Eyes Ryoshu is one of the more interesting ideas to discuss, especially with how much she has to offer, from her connection to Spider-Bud, to her opinions on parents being fools who can't stand even a moment not spent injecting their children with their own prejudices, or even her being compared to the fucking Red Mist. Holy shit. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked here. Now, the same way with Encore Ryoshu, Red Eyes Ryoshu also needs some explanation of an abnormality to understand some things about her. That being Spider-Bud. Spider-Bud is a very simple abnormality that focuses on two things: primal instinct and its main gimmick here, motherhood. It is incredibly violent towards anyone that kills its children. It's very protective of them, after all, like a mother. However, Ryoshu criticizes that fact, saying something along the lines of her motherhood being a part of its instinct and not coming from it being an actual parent. Hell, in her ID story, she even says, while threatening Spider-Bud by threatening the lives of its children, children, one does not choose their birth parent, yet they are born with and saddled with a responsibility to live within their bounds. Unless you're merely a pathetic, fallen shell of a thing who can do nothing but grandstand, if you really consider these baby spiders your family, shouldn't you be attacking me by now? Which firstly, aura, massive aura, but secondly, it comes to show the kind of parents that she does genuinely hate. The kind of parents who presume they deserve to be called family, or those that try to clean up their children's mess, or even those who don't properly raise and take care of their children as they should, etc. But again, along with her opinions on parenthood and her connection to Spiderwood, she also has a very big connection to, holy shit, is that the red mist? Okay, I'll finally shut up about it. But isn't it interesting on how much she is compared to the red mist, no? Her strength, her technique, her usage of both red eyes and penance and like. Hell, let me remind you that her Canto is also one to get the Gebera Durante skill, which is probably going to be quite a sick Durante skill if you ask me. Maybe it has something to do with unbreakable coins, like transforming all of our coins to unbreakable coins, plus some offensive buffs for a few turns. That would probably be alright for a Durante skill, I imagine. But it's definitely not as cool as just summoning the red mist herself into the battlefield as she horizontal slashes the entire arena. Though to be fair, it's too early to guess that when we're not even in part 1 of all things, so yeah. Now, before I move on to talking about her egos, if you haven't noticed by now, there seems to be a big elephant in the room here. Something that every single Ryoshu ID has and yet is just staying there, doing nothing in the background. That being her Odachi. You see, if you don't know, every single ID of every single sinner has at least one particular item or trait that is shared across all IDs. Every Don has their shoes, every Hanlu has his jade eye, every Otis has her watch, and every Gregor has some kind of problem with his arm. Now, of course, the bad end IDs aren't included this for obvious reasons, but we're not talking about them here. I already did that some time ago. In the case of Ryoshu, it's her big sword. What special meaning does her sword have? What sort of connection that Ryoshu has with this sword? Well, let's start with the basics and say that in the story, she never unsheaths it, ever. The only time that she was extremely tempted to do that was with Lehen, but beyond that though, she never does. Hell, in the fucking second April Fools of all things, Ryoshu doesn't want Hanlu to unsheath it either, seeing that he better prepare for the consequences of doing that. But why is she so hesitant on pulling the sword? As Lehen says, "You darn sure ought to unsheath that sword if you really wanted to win," as he proceeds to use his Savage Tiger Slayer's perfected flurry of blades on us. Unnerved, of course. But if that is really true, then what exactly is it that she's worried about? Well, a couple of things, I imagine. Now, I'm spoiling a very tiny but major portion of Hellscreen here, but it really has to be mentioned here. The sword definitely has something to do with her child. In every single ID, she never uses it, and instead she either just carries it on her back or lets it lean on something very nicely, almost as if it's just there, watching something, either something like a view or Ryoshu herself. And if you need more evidence of that fact, then just look at her base ego, Force for the Flames, where in the art itself she's cuddling with it, while the 5 fingers just watch her from the window. Creepy. But yeah, in short, the sword has something to do with her child. There's also the Yojutsu Kugo that is written on her sheet that is also quite important as well, with each one being Mugamutsu, Abikyokan, and Shirimetsuretsu, with each one translating to something along the lines of losing control of oneself, to cry out in the midst of tragedy, and either incoherent or illogical or something like that. Now, I'm not a translator or anything of the sort, so someone else can do a better job than that. But the reason I mention this is because I think this is the said consequences of unsheathing the sword. It's meant to be a warning to the user that unsheathing that sword will cause many tragedies and that you will lose control of yourself, becoming maddened by it, which is kind of terrifying to think about since Ryoshu will most likely unsheath this blade in Canto 9, so yeah. But let's move on to her ego now, I guess. When it comes to egos, all of them are pretty interesting, to say the least, despite some of them being somewhat obvious to what they actually mean. As of right now, she has 8 egos. Her base ego, Force for the Flames, Soda, Red Eyes, 2 of them actually, Blind Obsession, Fourth Match Flame, Thoracalgia, and Contempt Awe. I don't think I need to provide too much of an explanation for Red Eyes and Contempt Awe, since I already did that when I talked about her 2 IDs that are based off of their egos. But I would like to mention one thing in regards to red eyes. For some particular reason, she's the only sinner to have two egos that are based off of the same abnormality. There's the normal red eyes and the open red eyes. I can't really tell you why exactly she's the only one to have that, but both egos, despite having the abnormality's main gimmick being motherhood, and would be quite fitting for Ryoshu, is actually focused on her primal instinct instead, focused on catching someone in her web and feeding on their flesh and blood. Hell, even their passives don't mention anything about it. Now, you can say that Spider-Butt's motherhood is the reason that she has that ego, but again, it's nowhere mentioned directly in there either way, and plus I just wanted to point that out there. Now, Soda is an interesting choice to have. Well, Cheers is a weird abnormality with a disturbing theme of drugging and kidnapping people and sending them to fishing boats. But what does that have to do with Ryoshu here? Well, maybe it's meant to represent the drug part of the abnormality and the woozy feeling that you get from it, forsaking everything around you and focusing on the pleasurable, drowsy feeling of addiction, just like how she feels with art itself, I guess. I mean, her corrosion does mention the feeling of drowsiness, so maybe, I don't know. Blind obsession is obvious, right? I don't think I need to explain why one of the more prideful sinners on the bus and has an obsession with art has the blind obsession ego, right? Now, Thoracalgia here is meant to represent her immense feeling of being restricted to her fate, I guess. No matter how many times she tries to change it, no matter how much she tried to reach out and grab onto something or anything, it is futile. Her fate, whatever it is sealed and it hurts. So much to the point that it even hurts to even breathe. Now sure, maybe I'm reading too much into it, and it's probably just because she's a chain smoker and is restrained to continue smoking, hence the reason why she has a nebulizer abnormality, but oh well. And I've already gone through Contempt already, so I don't need to do that. Now, I have not mentioned Fort Match Flame or even Force for the Flames yet, for the simple reason that these two are essentially the same ego in terms of aesthetics and themes. I mean, if you think about it, they're both burn related, they both talk about burning things up, and they even have her sword on there. But beyond just that, they even have the same theme when it comes to her child. Force for the Flames has Ryoshu cuddling her sword like a child, as said before, and Fort Match Flame is based off of an abnormality where a child burns herself to ash with matchsticks to warm herself up in the cold night. Now you might be asking yourself, why is there a correlation between her child and fire? Well, this is where we now need to discuss some things beyond the game itself, that being Ryoshu's literary source. As it is with every other sinner, Ryoshu also has a literary source where both the character and some parts of their past take a good amount of inspiration from. It's a short story called Jigoku Hen, otherwise known as Hellscreen. Hellscreen was written by a writer named Ryunosuke Akutagawa in 1918, and was very much known for writing a lot of short stories, including Kuma no Ito, otherwise known as the Spider's Thread, which also, in one way or another, is connected to Ryoshu with a relation to this house of spiders, red eyes, and Spider-Bud in general, which makes me wonder what other short stories from Akutagawa that PM took inspiration from to make Ryoshu, but that is going beyond what we need to know in this video, I say. Now, Hellscreen was one of the more earlier titles that he wrote that were more of a reinterpretation of even older titles. In the case of Hellscreen, it was a very old and an even shorter story that was part of a series of even more short stories called Ebishi Ryoshu. Now, doesn't this sound familiar? But never mind that. Now, before I start talking about Hellscreen, I want to specify one tiny thing, which is that I'm not going to cover Hellscreen in its entirety, mostly because of two reasons. One, it's because I want to focus on covering Limbus Ryoshu and not have like a fifth or more of the video dedicated towards summarizing a book that doesn't have any proper connections back to Limbus, besides the major things, of course. And the second reason is simply because, well, Vadur is also making a Ryoshu video, and if his Hanmu video is anything to go by, then his video will have a major focus on Hellscreen itself. So I see no reason to yap a bunch about Hellscreen if someone else is already doing that. At least more than I will, so like, if you're interested in learning more about Hellscreen beyond this video that you're watching, then you can just watch Wells' video, or you can just read the damn book itself. It's free to read and easily available on the Creepypasta wiki of all things, so that's something. Jigoku Hen follows the story of four major characters: the nameless and unreliable narrator, who narrates certain events that they see or hear that lead to the creation of the Hellscreen. The narrator here is also a servant of another character, the Lord of Horikawa, which, as the name implies, he's a lord of Horikawa. Now, our dim-witted and unreliably biased narrator here loves to praise the fuck out of the Lord, describing him as someone great, as someone who, despite the rumors and critiques that follow him, was never the one who wanted glory glory, and was, in the servant's words, a man of great magnanimity who shared his joys with the wider world, so to speak, and kept in mind even the lowliest of his subjects. But as you read along the story, it becomes very obvious on who the Lord truly is, even when the narrator tries to defend him. Now, along with those two, we also have Yoshihide and his daughter, aka the focus characters of the book. And yes, Ryoshu was a man in their literary source, just like every single other female sinner for that fact. Yoshihide is an unpleasant old man who was considered to be the greatest painter of the land for practically all the wrong reasons. He's arrogant and harsh, and his paintings were utterly horrifying, to the point that other people who saw his work could hear or even smell how disgusting and horrifying the paintings were, as if they're experiencing whatever the painting is meant to show. Now, despite that, however, he was always commissioned a bunch by the Lord himself to paint these sort of things, and he was proud of that fact. In his words, other painters are such mediocrities, they cannot appreciate the beauty of ugliness. He was perverse, as the servant would call him, but it was nothing compared to what some other people who despised his existence would call him, Sarahide, or monkey hide, since he walked and looked like a monkey. However, despite his perverseness and arrogance, he did have a more tender and softer side when it came to one thing alone, that being his daughter. Although unnamed in the original story, other adaptations did give her a name, such as Yuzuki or Yoshika, but I'll be calling her Yuzuki here because that's more familiar to some people who have been on Reddit and looked up some Ryoshu theories here and there out of interest. Now, Yuzuki is the complete opposite of who Yoshihide was. She's kind, gentle, and beautiful, a complete foil to her father. She was extremely kind to everything and everyone around her, to the point that she even has a small pet monkey who was also named Yoshihide. The monkey was always around her, tied by a bell with some red string of course, but it never wanted to leave her side, and always tried to take care of her, like a responsible adult, wink wink. Now, there is a major plot point that makes the story as tragic as it is in regards to Yuzuki, and it's the fact that she's under employment for the Lord of Horikawa as the lady-in-waiting. And as good as that position sounds, being directly under the Lord, Yoshihide doesn't necessarily like it, and asks the Lord, multiple times even, if the Lord can return my daughter to her former lowly state, which firstly, the Lord refuses to do that, and secondly, this annoys the fuck out of him, but that didn't really stop him to eventually give Yoshihide a commission to paint a folding screen portraying scenes from the 8 Buddhist hells. After that, Yoshihide sealed himself off from the world as he puts a lot of his energy into painting the hell screen, going so far as to torture his own apprentices and also having horrific nightmares of hell, which he would then use as inspiration to paint parts of the hell screen. Now, while he's doing that, rumors have been going around that the Lord wants to take Yuzuki in as his mistress, which she has said no to, but this rejection eventually led to an incident where our narrator witnesses a potential SA but worse, if you know what I mean, between the Lord and Yuzuki, after her monkey led them to the commotion to help Yuzuki, and the narrator still believes they saw someone else potentially assaulting Yuzuki and not the Lord, you fucking dumbass narrator. Eventually, Yoshihide asks the Lord to help him finish the hell screen by burning a carriage with a woman inside it, since he cannot paint what he hasn't seen yet, and the Lord agrees to it and provides Yoshihide with what he asked. However, the twist is that the woman is actually Yoshihide's daughter. Yoshihide tried to save her, but because he was being restrained by the Lord's guards, Yuzuki, along with the monkey, who always wanted to be with her, dies from the massive pillar of flame, while Yoshihide can do nothing but watch as his daughter burns to ash, while the Lord enjoys the gruesome sight with the narrator, who was here as well, saying the corners of his mouth flecked with foam, hands clutching his knees through his lavender trousers as he panted like a beast in need of water. A month later, Yoshihide completes the hell screen, presents it to everyone in the mansion, along with the Lord of course, and eventually hanged himself, as he can no longer live with the consequences of what he needed to witness and sacrifice to finish the hell screen. Okay, now that we're done with that, what does any of this have anything to do with Ryoshu or even Canto 9 of all things? Well, here's something that I will say first, however, and that's to subscribe and like the video. This was a video that I had in mind for a long time by now, and I finally made one of the few videos that I've always wanted to make ever since I started focusing on Limbus. So please do that. Thank you. But back to Ryoshu. This is where I start to connect a lot of streams together, since we have discussed practically everything there is to say about Ryoshu, I think. Maybe. Not at all, past me. Not at all. Anyways, hi there. Editing Crow here. So this video has been in production for a few days now, and the 9th anniversary stream happened. And in my opinion, it was pretty good, I'd say. But the reason why I'm here is because of obviously the fucking teaser for season 7, of course. And my god, is there a lot that I have to say about that. First of all, Canto 9 is releasing on New Year's Eve, which is certainly a decision. But yeah, I'm excited for that. Very. Second of all, the season is called Kumo no Ito Aka no Ito, which means spider's thread, red thread, or string, I guess. I realized that I have not talked much about Akutagawa's other short story, Kumo no Ito, in detail at least. And that's which in retrospect I should have probably expanded more on it, but oh well. So in short, Kumo no Ito follows a cold-hearted thief named Kandata who is suffering in hell for all his bad deeds. But the Buddha who saw him remembers that he has done one good deed, that being not killing a spider on a walk in the forest. So as to pay respects, he sends down a silver thread from a spider all the way down to hell from paradise in the hopes to save him. Kandata, who saw the thread, grabs onto it and starts to climb. After a while, he looks down to see that there are many other people in hell trying to climb up the thread as well. So, out of selfishness to get out of hell himself, he proclaims that this thread is his alone to climb, and the instant he says that, the thread snaps and everyone who climbed the thread back to hell. Now, what does that have to do with Ryoshu herself? Well, I'm not sure, to be honest. At least lore-wise. Maybe it has something to do with her illustration with all the red threads. But considering that Velmori is, well, gone, I doubt we'll see it again, which is saddening because I think that illustration looks pretty cool. Now, thematically, I guess it has something to do with her selfishness or willingness, I guess, to enter hell itself, along with some other things that I've already mentioned before, I'm guessing. If you have your thoughts into how Spider's thread plays into Ryoshu's story beyond being a part of Red Eyes, then please do tell me. Thank you. But since I mentioned Ego, my god, I love this Battle Pass Ego. And just from the artwork alone, we can tell a lot about what this Ego is meant to be about. Firstly, the outfit, as everyone has pointed out by now, is a Japanese wedding kimono, otherwise known as a shiramuku, which should be recognizable if you have played Silent Hill F. Secondly, all of the red threads around her, along with the second part of the season name, probably has something to do with something called the Red Thread of Fate, an invisible red thread that connects two people together that are destined to be together. Man, Project Moon is not even trying to hide anything, huh? But the red string is all over the place, almost as if to suggest that everything around her is probably fascinated by her, or vice versa. Maybe. Now, there's a lot more to talk about with this Ego, such as her swords, the abnormality itself, the demons that appear on the side, her hood, placenta thing, etc. But I think it's a bit too early to talk more about it, especially since the animations and the voice line is not here yet. God, I can't wait for the animations when they release. It'll be so fucking cool. Anyways, with that out of the way, I'll leave you to past me now, I guess. Let's start off with this first. What are we actually doing in Canto 9? Without any sort of teaser or the like, I'm only basing this off of my own intuition and what we have discussed so far. So I'm only guessing here, but considering everything that's been said at the end of Canto 8 and Spring Cultivation, we are most likely going to Q-Core, aka District 17. And considering that we don't have any other location in mind, this is the best guess that we can make. So far, at least. The only things that we do know about Q-Core is that they have a good relationship with H-Core, thanks to Yuanshin, but they also utilize some sort of talisman or glyph technology that the Heisho use. Also, Roland comes from its back streets, so take what you will from that. But speaking of the back streets, the fingers obviously will play a major role here in the Canto, along with the House of Spiders and Ryoshu's child. But what exactly is going to happen here? Well, I say that we may or may not have a finger Baobel upon us. Now, we don't know what exactly a finger Baobel is, but we do know that it's a sort of meeting for each one of the 5 fingers to discuss major topics. So if we do have a finger Baobel upon us, then this probably is going to be one of the more special Baobels, since 1, Leihen is fucking dead, so there will be a lot of trouble with the thumb, I imagine. And they will definitely have a lot to say on what they want to do, since their capo is fucking gone. But along with that, they'll probably also talk about Ryoshu. Considering that Leihen has a connection to the House of Spiders, then it's not impossible to include the other fingers to also have something to do with the house. And Ryoshu is implied to have lived there as well, so the fingers will also have a lot to talk about in regards to Ryoshu. Since firstly, Ryoshu here is of the same rank as Lei Hen by thumb standards, and someone important like that coming back to her home is certainly a topic to discuss. But what exactly does Ryoshu have to do with the fingers? I have mentioned that their relationship is quite antagonistic, and it's quite obvious now that her child has something to do with that antagonistic relationship. But what exactly is it that this relationship entailed? How does she know a lot about the five fingers? Well, I believe that has something to do with what Lei Hen says, that beyond even just being on a similar rank, it seems like Lei Hen also trained Ryoshu on how to fight, how to hold your sword real good, right like back when. Oh, Jesus Christ, that sentence fucking sucks. And also how to make every cut real fucking delicious. This dialogue also reveals that he's not the only one who trained her, since he also says, "Weren't mine the best out of them all?" So here's what I think of this. I think that each and every one of the fingers has taken a massive liking to whatever Ryoshu had, that being either Ryoshu herself, or her talents with combat, her special sword, or even her child. Since if you want to make similarities back to Hellscreen real quick, Ryoshu is Yoshihide, her child is Suzuki, and the fingers, or at the very least someone amongst the five fingers that is very much high in the ranking here, is meant to represent the Lord of Horikawa. And if Hellscreen has something to say, they have taken an interest to whatever it is about Ryoshu, and thus have sent out Lei Hen and 4 other representatives of the Five Fingers to do something with Ryoshu. So they train her not only on how to use a sword, but also some aspects and secrets of the fingers, how they work, how they fight, their ideals, goals, and maybe because of that training, a lot of her personality and the like comes from her interactions with the fingers. That is, until Ryoshu did something to piss them off. That is probably in relation with her child or something like that. And Ryoshu eventually left the House of Spiders and joined the LCB. Now, again, a lot of what I said here comes from my ass, and Project Moon will probably have a much better explanation than whatever I just did, but then again, that's what happens when you're working with limited information. But since I mentioned her, let's talk about Yuzuki and Limbus, since she will play a major role towards Ryoshu's arc in Canto 9. When it comes to talking about Ryoshu's child and looking at Hellscreen, we have to answer one specific question. That being, is Ryoshu's child alive or dead during the events of Limbus Company before Canto 9? Because knowing the answer to that question can explain a lot about Ryoshu, why she's here in the LCB, what her Canto is going to be about, etc. Well, let's start off with what we know. As far as we can tell from what Lei Hen said, Ryoshu's child is probably still alive and well in the House of Spiders, but considering that something happened back there as well, which also caused Ryoshu to leave, may also lead to some thoughts on her being dead. But oh well, let's say that Yuzuki is still alive. Why is Ryoshu here then? Well, maybe she was invited by Faust because they promised to save her child until the right time in exchange for becoming a sinner, or something else entirely, whatever that deal was. Now, the fingers, or someone amongst the fingers, took her child and maybe or maybe not even just taken her, but have also done something far worse. Now, considering Hellscreen and Project Moon's stance on implementing anything in relation to SA to their works, I completely doubt that it has something to do with that. I don't think PM will actually make that kind of scene with Ryoshu's child, but I do believe that PM can do something similar, I imagine, yet more tamer, and that is in regards to the nature of the House of Spiders. You see, Captain Merceau has a voice line in regards to the House of Spiders, saying that it has a certain effect to the person's speech. And in his voice line, he says that red wine with 2 freshly pulled teeth makes for a good pairing, a mariage with this particular circumstance, almost like a work of art. So, what if, right, this incident that Lei Hen mentions has something to do with her child and someone among the fingers, someone that is meant to be the Lord of Horikawa in Limbus, has forcefully married Ryoshu's daughter, to which she eventually caught on and tried to intervene by most likely trying to kill the Lord of Horikawa, which eventually led to her being in the LCB. Now, yet again, I'm only guessing here, but unlike the other speculatory ramble, this one has at least some ground to stand on, but that doesn't answer the specific question of whether Ryoshu's child is alive or dead, and to be quite honest, I'm not sure myself. This is only based off of what Lei Hen says, and even he says that he ain't exactly nose deep in them fellers' business, so even he didn't know for sure. I guess we'll have to wait for Canto 9 to show what happened, I guess. But in regards to Canto 9, let's talk about it. I have talked non-stop about Ryoshu's past and present states, but what will happen in the future? What will happen in the coming weeks when Canto 9 The Unsevering releases? At least in regards to Ryoshu as a character, since she is quite possibly one of the few sinners that is genuinely quite, well, not necessarily evil, but she is quite sadistic and has a lot of traits that can be considered evil. She's sadistic, arrogant, and violent, but she's also quite caring and tender to some people around her, in her own way at least. So it's quite difficult to know what Project Moon will cook up with her Canto. But if there is one thing that I'm very confident in saying about this Canto, is that this will be a very violent and depressing Canto in many ways. And I don't think this Canto will end the same way on how Canto 8 ended, with joy and hope, but rather in a similar way, if not worse, to how Canto 6 ended, with a bitter taste. An ending that, while yes, we probably did win in some regard, we got what we needed, unless we have failed, and who boy what a Canto that will be, but after many bloody trials and loss, it will be an ending that will not feel good to get, is what I'm saying here. Although, then again, I, along with many others, suspected that Canto 8 will end in sadness, and that was wrong. So I'll accept a happy ending if it's good and reasonable. I just don't think, knowing everything that I've talked about here, I'm not confident in getting a happy ending with this Canto. But that doesn't mean that Ryoshu will be even more depressed. In fact, if anything, I'm hopeful for Ryoshu herself to get a naturally hopeful change in her Canto. Again, Canto 6 ended with some depression here and there, sure, but yet Heathcliff is hopeful. He wants to remember the past and remember Kathy, even when everyone has forgotten her. So I don't doubt that Ryoshu will have a more hopeful character progression. In fact, us getting the Gebra Durante in this Canto is a sign of that. Canto 9 will obviously have many themes in it, family, artistic obsession, and some other cool themes here and there, but I believe that the biggest theme that this Canto will try to tackle is courage. Courage in the face of hesitation. I've said it before, but Ryoshu has a very defeatist attitude when it comes to fighting stronger opponents. She always kind of just gives up. Now, what does that say with the Lord of Horikawa in Limbus? I'm not sure. Maybe the character is very powerful, but she doesn't care if she survives or dies. She just expects death to come for her one day, whether it comes in the form of being violently pulverized or cut apart by a stronger enemy, or in a more slow and painless way, as the light of light slowly burns out by smoking a bunch. Maybe that's why she has that Torikage ego. But never mind that. Now, why is it that she has that attitude? Well, we can only guess, but the Durante skill that is coming with Canto 9, Gebra, will obviously play a huge part for her character progression. The courage to protect, the courage to fight back against any sort of hesitation and doubt that creeps upon your mind, the courage to protect what is behind you. It's one of the strongest things that anyone can have. In a world where doubt can easily creep upon you whenever any sort of wrench or problem is thrown in your way, people inherently doubt their strength to pull themselves out of it. And so some would either choose to believe in these doubts and pull themselves away from any sort of risk, or just expect the worst result of any kind of decision made. But that doesn't mean that giving up is the only choice here. You can have the choice and courage to stand up and fight. Now, sure, it's easier said than done, but it takes a lot of courage to, at the very least, try something, failing a bunch of times, and continue to stand in the face of that failure. Now imagine that everything that I said in this video is entirely wrong and the Canto has a completely different message than whatever I said, Lamau. Anyways, yeah. I feel like I should mention that with the whole part about courage and like, it kind of made me think about my journey through content creation. Anyone that has had any experience in anything in relation to creating something from your mind and heart, like art or writing, etc., can relate to this a bunch, but doubt is a natural thing that I have come across a lot, especially with this video in particular. Having that particular voice always saying in your head that this part looks bad, you have to change it for the better, and since you've noticed that this was bad, you begin to doubt more about the overall thing, you know? And it gets too much at a certain point, but I don't want to complain about my problems here now. So yeah, I'm very excited for Canto 9 whenever that's releasing. I hope that it ends the way that I feel like it should. Unless it doesn't, then I hope that it's going to be overall great either way, even without the second interval to expand more on Ryoshu. Oh, and I also want to quickly predict the abnormalities that will appear as the season Lego for the next season, since that's also coming up as well, and also as a way to expand the video's length, just saying. Now, other than Ryoshu's egos, since recently new abnormalities have been introduced as the seasonal ego for the focus characters, so I don't want to sink my feet into something that I don't know yet. So other than that, I think that Wailing Coffin is 100% going to appear here. The abnormality itself as a whole reference to Shinto rituals and a couple more Japanese things, so yeah. And along with Wailing Coffin, the second abnormality will either be Drenched Gossipium or Rise in Ashes. I say Gossipium mostly because of Yisan not getting an ego in practically over a year now, and fits him a bunch with its references to nostalgia and the like. And I guess another thing to add towards Ryoshu's memory problems. And Rise in Ashes is here mostly because of this season being burn season, most likely, and also having a bunch of references to a fiery funeral with ashes to ashes, dust to dust, and soothe the dead. It would be a very fitting abnormality to have for a season which focuses on someone whose daughter has literally been burned to death, or will be. I also wouldn't be surprised if that abnormality would be Ryoshu's ego, but it can also be an entirely new abnormality as said before, so who knows. This video is long enough as it is, and I don't feel like making it longer, so bye!